I'm Diana Bailey, Executive Director of the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, and my guest today is Dr. Catherine Gira. Welcome, Catherine.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. You have quite a her story, and you have quite a lot of experience as an educator, as an advocate, and as an activist in your community. Can you tell us kind of how you got started in that, what your educational background was, or your family? What got you started into your very prominent career and as an inductee into the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame? So you've been a busy woman.
Well, I think in terms of my career, it started when I was 4 years old. If my parents are correct in remembering, apparently I liked to accumulate dolls. But I started at the age of 4, lining them up and teaching them.
Oh, getting them more, yes, of course.
So I was a teacher from probably prenatal stage. In any event, I was a teacher all of my life, and after I graduated with my baccalaureate degree, taught at Catonsville High School. Taught high school for 6 years, loved it, loved it. I think it's the most gratifying profession there is.
What was your area of concentration?
English. And then I went on eventually to get my doctorate and did my work on Shakespeare and taught at the university level before I went into administration. But some of those high school students who are now in their 70s invite me back to their 50th reunions.
Very nice.
And so, as I said, it's one of those long-lasting, gratifying careers, I think. So that was my career path until I went into administration at the University of Baltimore. First as provost for 9 years and then president of Frostburg State University for 15 years. And what I missed most, I think, at Frostburg was not being able to teach. When I was provost, I still could keep a class and keep my hand in that. But in some ways, I think higher administration is a teaching facility. If you have the notion that it's not hierarchical. I have a very strong feeling about administration, and that is that the metaphors that we use are not only negative, they're destructive. Career ladders is a metaphor I abhor. And I do remember going to a conference once where we were talking to young women in their 30s about their careers. And the woman ahead of me had several radio TV stations. She was a mogul. And she talked to them about their career ladders and how they had to know how to get to the next step, even if it meant knocking off somebody between you and them until you got to the top. And I said, when I got up there, that I prefer the path. Because you don't know where it's going. You don't know what's at the next turn. I remember that Robert Frost poem about two roads diverging in a wood. But if you go this way, you can backtrack and go the other way at another stage in your life. You don't expect the death of your spouse at an early age, as I experienced with 2 young teenagers to help to raise. All that kind of thing hits you blindsided sometimes in life. And I think Hamlet said the readiness is all. I think if you do a good job with what you're doing, if you like what you're doing, if you know you'd like to either continue to do that or maybe turn a little bit, that will help you in life to deal with those pauses and turnarounds and all that kind of thing that can come to you.
It's interesting to hear you talk about your background in Shakespeare, but give practical application to the messages that you learned from that type of literature.
Right.
So very interesting. You were also talking about the career ladders. I imagine you have other feelings about leadership and women's leadership.
I do. As I said, ladders suggest that whoever is at the top pretty much controls everything leading up to it. The other one that I don't like is pyramid, which has exactly the same geometric implications. And you know, from time to time, there are all these management books, which I never read, never have read, about how to manage situations. And it was interesting that back in the, I guess, 80s, when I was provost, there was a lot of literature began to come out about Japanese management, the circle, and that's what I like to see. You have a core people who are the administrative center, and then you have concentric circles of people who support and actively are involved, but nobody is up here and down there.
It's like the collaborative learning.
It's a
principle.
collaborative learning, and that's, I think, what in mentoring young women, and I've gotten letters, actually. I published an article once about career ladders and career paths, and I got a letter from a woman in a school in Pennsylvania who had passed up the opportunity to take on a vice presidency. She had not quite completed her doctorate, and her husband kept saying, why don't you do what you're doing now? Something else will come along. And she did that, and she completed her doctorate, and as a result she was able to get a much, much more exciting job down the road.
Right.
So she wrote to me about how that sort of resonated with her life experience, I should say. But I think leadership is a function of personality. I don't think you can learn it from a book. I don't think there are 20 steps to being the best.
Somewhat intuitive.
Very intuitive, and also relational, how you relate to people. And so if you tend to have a more autocratic personality, you get things done. There are some very effective people who do that, but their style is not my style.
Probably doesn't match most other people either.
No, it doesn't. And they talk about feminine and masculine, about gender styles. And what I'm talking about is often characterized as a feminine gender style. But I have known men who have also been inclusive and have been very helpful to women. You know, I always say to women, you need networking. I think that's terribly important, because you need to be able to talk to somebody in your peer group, whether it's immediate or somewhere away, that can resonate with what you're going through and help you talk it through and think it through. But you also need sponsors. And in many organizations that are still male-dominated, a strong recommendation from a man may get the attention of a board. Yeah, it's still there. So that, given the fact that that's kind of the nature of the beast, if you will, you need to take advantage of the fact. My life reflected that all the way through. My father, first of all, was an only child and a girl, and I was born into a family in which my cousins were athletes. One of them became a professional baseball player for the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Braves. They were then Boston, and then what were then the Brooklyn Dodgers. And my father always said to me, you don't need to worry about that. You'll do what you do best. My mother thought school teachers were abused.
Oh, really? They are sometimes.
Well, when she
not
was
respected sometimes.
When
right?
she was a child, a teacher couldn't be married.
Oh, right.
So she said, you know, they will contain your life. Do something like being a secretary or a nurse. And my father said, do what you want to do. And I was always addicted to books and things.
Wow, your dad had a really big impact on some of your career choices, didn't he?
He did.
It was great to have his support, I'm sure. We need to go for a short break, but we'll be back and hear more from you.
Okay, I'd be happy to tell you about the role that my husband has played in my life.
Looking forward to hearing that. We'll be right back. Welcome back from break. And Catherine, we're back, and I think before the break you were going to talk a little bit about the role that your husband played in your life, of course, and then in your career.
Yes. I went back to finish my doctorate after we had children. And so my husband just picked up at a time before husbands were beginning to take on a lot of domestic responsibilities. And so he cooked, and he did the laundry, and he was a full-time manager of Westinghouse. But he would come up, and I would be locked in my study, working on my doctorate, and with the door closed, and he'd open, put a cup of coffee in, and close the door. But that kind of support is inestimable. You know, it was a family enterprise, and the kids were really good too. And then in my career itself, I worked for a while at the State Department of Education, and Dr. Pullen was then the superintendent of schools in Maryland. And when he became the president of the University of Baltimore, he called me because I'd done some editorial work for the department and asked me to come. And so I went part-time there, and then stayed when my kids got a little older. And then he was succeeded by Mevin Turner, the
So you had
longtime
several
president.
male
men
at that
who
time
pushed,
helped
pushed,
you
pushed.
and pushed you. Yeah.
So I think, as I said, male sponsors are very important when women think about their careers. And more women are in positions of influence now in boards and things of that sort.
And the network is bigger. And
bigger and bigger. Not where it needs to be, but it's getting there.
Right.
It's getting there.
Right.
And I think it's an obligation of women to help to support, mentor, whatever you want to call it, other women in their organizations. There is that metaphor of the queen bee who would prefer not to have women around her and prefers to surround herself with men. The uncharitable metaphor with drones, but nevertheless, I think women need to look out for other women in that way. Not overestimate their ability, but certainly reward appropriately their abilities. Yeah.
Well, let's go to the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame.
Yes.
And that happened a few years ago. I think you had 2 children, right?
I do.
Yes, and were your children able to enjoy that event with you?
My daughter was at the time, I think, in California, but my son and his family were there, including my 2-year-old granddaughter, who came. It was in the Legislative Services Building, and she stole the show because she was adorable. She was walking around. When we got to Government House, she went around to every room as if she were the hostess.
Oh.
And so it was
Planning to be
wonderful.
the first lady or the governor, I
what
don't
she
know.
was
Right.
planning to do. But it was a wonderful occasion. It was, and I feel now that I am aware of all the women who have been inducted into the Hall of Fame. How unworthy I am compared to those women.
Just maybe humble, but not unworthy.
I mean, they're just women doing extraordinary things in fields again, like medicine and science, that for a long time engineering were unrepresented. But it was a very exciting time for all of us, and I think it had more to do with breaking the so-called glass ceiling in a couple of places. When the University System of Maryland was put together, it included institutions like Towson, the University of Baltimore, and others, and all of the University of Maryland branches, College Park and others. And I was the first woman provost in that 11-campus system, and the first woman president in that 11-campus. So I think that's probably why. And I got a lot of support from the women legislators in Maryland, who also had some kind of an award. But it was related very much to changes. I think any woman, is what I'm saying, who might have had that position would have been recognized for the fact that it was turning things in a slightly
I think it was your
direction.
Shakespearean metaphors and your leadership style that probably helped a lot too.
It might have been. But, and again, it was a time when my children really, when I first went into administration as a provost, they were in college. So I didn't have to worry about that. And I'd had opportunities to move to administration earlier and pass them up. Again, path wasn't ready to move in that
Wasn't the right
direction.
time.
Yeah,
Right.
wasn't.
Talk to us a little bit about a recent experience you had with the incoming Hall of Fame.
Well, I served on the selection committee as the representative of the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, this wonderful organization that is attempting to preserve the history and actually not only preserve it, but educate the population to the wonderful history of women in Maryland. But in any event, I represented that organization, and there were 5 of us on the selection committee, and we were able to nominate for inclusion only 6 women. And they are absolutely outstanding. They will be inducted on March the 19th in Annapolis. And
Historic and contemporary, correct?
yeah, historic and contemporary. And one of the challenges, I think, of that whole enterprise, which is sponsored by the Maryland Commission on Women, is to reach back, because there are a couple of others that, if we had our druthers, I think we would have said, put them all in. You know,
Right,
but
of
you
course.
can't do that.
Right.
But some women like Clara Barton was internationally known, nationally known. There are others who were well known in the state and maybe the nation, but they lived in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, and their names are not as current maybe as women who have distinguished themselves more recently.
Sure, like Elmira Phelps, who was
Yes.
an early educator.
An early educator.
haven't heard of
There's
her,
a
right?
woman, you know, they're in the fields of the arts, you know, who were distinguished performers, international. There's one woman was an international performer in Russia. And things
was
like
that Ponzel?
We need to go back. No, Rosa Ponzel is in the Hall of Fame.
Right.
She wasn't.
Oh.
Yes, that kind of thing. But there are others, when you look at this panoply of possibilities, there maybe should be some effort even, and I put that down, we were supposed to put recommendations, and we had a conference call, and we kind of all agreed that there were a few more that we would have liked to have put in, that there should be a mechanism to go back and sort of get the record straight on those that were omitted, and maybe a special occasion to do that, or a special time where it would be just posthumous. And then the others, you know, go on from there.
Well, you know, we've tried to get more of the stories, her stories of those women,
Right.
into the hands of students.
Yes.
So again, as we're
Right.
looking for role models,
Yes.
we have students that come to the Heritage Center, and most of them have heard of Harriet Tubman. They've heard of, as you mentioned,
Right.
Rachel Carson,
Right.
but many of them had not heard of Henrietta Lacks or
Uh-huh.
Esther McCready,
Absolutely.
or other women
Right.
who had done
Right.
major
Right.
breakthrough things.
Right.
So it amazes me, even if they're from Baltimore,
Right.
they still. So we have a lot of
Right.
work to do
Right.
when it comes to women's history.
The other thing that I felt was wonderful about the Heritage Center is that in addition to housing now the Women's Hall of Fame, which it did not do initially but does now, and calling attention to those women who had distinguished themselves at some broad level. But it also tells the history of the anonymous women,
Oh,
of the
unsung.
Rosies, the Riveters in World War II, of the primarily African American women who picked crabs on the Eastern Shore, without whom the economy of the state could not have existed. And so I think it is really so all-embracing that I think it is a tremendous, tremendous resource for Maryland, and it's the only one of its kind in the United
Right.
States, which means that every other state should be doing exactly the same thing.
There's a lot of history everywhere, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, we've talked a little bit about younger women, and both either in terms of careers or in terms of learning leadership styles. What would be some of the messages, either metaphoric or other, that you do share either with adult students or with other women that are on their path, whatever that path might be?
Yes. Well, occasionally I'm invited to talk, not too long with the HR department at the University of Baltimore asked me to talk to people in classified positions who don't necessarily see themselves as moving up or moving out or whatever, feel boxed into a position.
That kind of stuff, sure.
And so again, it's easy to talk about paths. You know, it's a metaphor that has done me well, I should say. But I think it is, be true to yourself. Do as good a job as you possibly can where you are. If you feel that you are unhappy, try to figure out why and what kind of difference, whether it's personal or whether it's professional or what your options might be. But I never say think of rungs and ladders or tiers and pyramids.
Right.
So that kind of thing. And then, of course, for older people who are approaching retirement, I think you need to have a sense of where you would like to be. When I retired, my family wanted me to move near them.
Of course.
And my 5-year-old grandson said, "Grandma, you need to live near us so I can see you every day." And I said, "Yeah. When you're not in Cub Scouts and you're not swimming, and you're not, I'll see you on weekends." So I moved about a half hour away, and I see them on weekends now and again.
So you still very much have your own
You
active...
do. You have to have your own life. And there was a 90-year-old woman who called me from Frostburg to see how I was doing about 3 or 4 months after I retired, and I'd moved to Columbia, where I'd lived for all those years. And she said, "What are you up to?" And I kind of gave her my schedule, and she said, "You're flunking retirement."
Right, right.
And I said, "That's the kind of F I'd like to get."
That's right, right.
Yeah, you search for A's, but not in that regard.
Right.
So I think you do that. You have other interests. You can do book clubs. You can do, I'm in a poetry
Going back to
club.
your roots
like
of your
going to your
English
roots,
major.
exactly right.
Original passion, perhaps?
Absolutely. And then reconnecting. In my case, I had lived in Frostburg for 15 years, and so all of those friends that I had after being at the University of Baltimore for over 20 years are still there. Many students are still there. So just reconnecting. And we had lived in Columbia for over 20 years, and former neighbors are there. In fact, some of them are in my condominium building now.
Right.
So I think
A lot to do there to keep you
a lot
active
to
and
do, a lot to
stimulated,
do.
right.
Yeah, that's right. And you surround yourself with people like you and other women in the Heritage Center who are vital and alive and range from fairly young in their careers, early in their careers, to retirees. I think that's just what you have to do to keep your brain cells alive.
Well, you know, the other thing I was thinking about as you were talking, that sometimes when I talk to folks younger than I, they think that because we're in a particular position in life, or we've gotten, in your case, in the Hall of Fame, that you had a smooth path. So when you mentioned the fact that you lost your partner early,
Right.
and you were a single parent,
Right.
out of the blue. So how do you talk to other young women to get them to be prepared for something that might happen, or in terms of who knows what might happen, or an
Yeah.
illness of a child, or
Yes,
something.
right.
So what do you say to them in terms of being as prepared as you can be for something not so positive that happens to people all the time, unfortunately?
Yeah. I think it is, again, not to see life as linear. And so if there are pauses along the way, you pay attention to what is most important in your life. And the first time that I was offered the opportunity to apply for the provost position at the University of Baltimore was a national cert, I said no, because I had 2 teenage kids at home. They needed my attention. They needed my attention until they got through high school, got on to college. They were both very successful, but they were my responsibility. And it's, again, the notion that life may seem to be passing you by, but you simply take care of your priorities. And for me, a balance between personal and professional priorities, especially when I became the only breadwinner in the family, was always something challenging to do, but you've got to do it. And we had, even when my husband was living, family conferences every Saturday morning. My children were 14 months apart, and my son was the bratty little brother, only he wasn't, but he would annoy his sister. So we would talk it out on Saturday mornings, and that became for me a metaphor for a leadership style. And when I became provost, there was a very strong law school dean, very, very powerful business school dean. Then there were the arts and sciences, where I lived all of my life academically. And we used to sit around the table, and there had to be give and take with resources. When, somebody said to me when I took the presidency at Frostburg, for example, "Does masochism run in your family?" We were in the throes of a terrible recession. We had 20 cuts in our state budget in 1 year, and it incrementally ate away at us. So the same had begun at the University of Baltimore. But I found that when we could sit down as equals, and the dean of the law school, who had more power than anybody else, half the legislature graduated from that law school, I think, and they had a lot of political backing in Annapolis. But they needed to understand, too, that giving an increase to the salaries in the law school alone was not going to work, and we had to do something about spreading it a little more. So I think, again, those kinds of things, a woman adjusting, they were all men, obviously, adjusting to the style of men, which tends to be more confrontational sometimes, particularly those that believe in ladders.
At that time.
Yeah, at that time.
At that era, yeah.
That you need to find a way to communicate. I think communication skills, being an English major helped.
Right.
Yeah, you're comfortable with words, and that's helpful.
That's good. Well, I was curious about because of your love of Shakespeare, of which I know Shakespeare a little bit, but not tons, of course. But let's just say for a second that Shakespeare would have been a woman. How might some of the Shakespearean plays been the same or different, or would the leadership styles have been different? What would you think?
Well,
have you thought of that before? I was just curious.
No, I think it's a very interesting question, Diana. There have been attempts to do that. There was a version of The Tempest in which Helen Mirren played Prospero.
Oh.
I hated it.
Oh, okay.
I hated the film, and I'm going to get lots of hate letters if this is ever aired. I think not because Helen Mirren is not a wonderful actress, but the relationship between Lear and his daughters, for example, if you do Lear, would be disastrous. The Tempest was very much the same, because Prospero's relationship to his daughter Miranda is central to that play, and it's a mother-daughter instead of a father-daughter relationship. And the whole point of it, in many ways, has to do with hierarchy and with royalty and all that kind of thing. Hamlet has been played by a woman. Doesn't work either, for the very same reason. The dynamics, the relationship between Hamlet and his mother, for example, is very much changed if Hamlet is a woman. So that's why I just am not really into those kinds of versions.
I'll have to go back and reread some of the Shakespearean things I haven't read since college for a number of reasons, so I'll have to read it with maybe your lens on it as a different thing. So, well, we've had a chance to talk a lot about a lot of different things today. As we wrap up, are there a few other things on your mind or last words that you'd like to share, words of wisdom?
I just wanted to share my gratitude to the Maryland Heritage Center for the work that it's doing and for the privilege for having been involved in it and for having been involved in the selection process for the Women's Hall of Fame. It was really a wonderful experience and an educational experience.
You want to utilize your talents again.
Thank you.
Well, Catherine, we've had a wonderful show today. I thank you so much. And today we had Dr. Catherine Gira, a member of the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame, and very, very busy educator. Thank you so much, Dr. Gira.
Thank you, Diana.
Yeah, right.